The chamber fell silent when Councilor Vexin noticed the empty seat. For 40 standard years, a human representative had occupied that chair without fail, through wars and peace, through economic booms and diplomatic crises. The polished metal gleamed under the chamber's lights, vacant and cold. Ambassador Victoria Hayes was not there. Perhaps the humans are running late, Councilor Thrax said with a dismissive wave of his primary appendage. You know how emotional they can be. Probably delayed by some personal crisis. Several council members chittered in agreement, a sound that resembled laughter in a dozen languages. Vexin's scales rippled with unease. In 4 decades of service, she had never known Ambassador Hayes to miss a session, let alone arrive late. The human woman treated punctuality like a sacred duty. Something was wrong. The session continued without humanity's voice. Trade agreements were ratified, territorial disputes were mediated, and the council moved through its agenda with practiced efficiency. Vexin tried to focus on the proceedings, but her attention kept drifting to that empty chair. When her aide approached mid-session, pressing a data tablet into her clawed hand with trembling fingers, she knew her instincts had been correct. The message on the screen was simple and devastating. Every human trade vessel in council space had turned toward Earth simultaneously 3 hours ago. Every human diplomatic station had been evacuated. Every human citizen living on alien worlds had received recall notices and were already boarding transport ships. The exodus was complete, coordinated, and executed with military precision. Humanity had withdrawn from the Galactic Council without a single word of explanation. Vexin's blood ran cold as she read the report a second time, then a third. The implications crashed over her like a wave. She looked around the chamber at her fellow councilors, still debating minor policy adjustments, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding around them. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "The humans are gone," she announced, her voice cutting through the debate. "All of them. They've recalled every citizen and severed all contact with council space." The chamber erupted into chaos. Councilors shouted questions and accusations in a babble of languages. Thrax pounded his fist on his desk, demanding order, but the pandemonium only grew. It took 20 minutes to restore enough calm for the emergency intelligence briefing to begin. The news was worse than anyone had imagined. Humanity had not just withdrawn their people. They had closed every communication channel, shut down every diplomatic frequency, and erected a defensive perimeter around their entire stellar territory that council sensors could not penetrate. Automated messages in 200 languages played on endless loops at every border point, stating simply that humanity was suspending all relations with the Galactic Council indefinitely. No explanation was given. Demands were made. No threats were issued. They had simply left. "This is an outrage," Councilor Zareth declared, his voice booming across the chamber. "We should send a military fleet to demand answers. This withdrawal violates a dozen treaties, which we will be unable to enforce," Vexin said quietly, "if the humans refuse to acknowledge our authority. And I suspect they have the military capability to back up that refusal." She was right, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Humanity's defensive technology was among the most advanced in known space. They had shared some of it freely with the Council, but intelligence suggested they kept their most powerful weapons classified. No one wanted to test human military resolve. "Why would they do this?" Councilor Miranda asked, her crystalline form refracting the chamber lights into rainbow patterns. "We have had peace with humanity for 4 decades. What could possibly justify this action?" Vexin began pulling historical records, her fingers moving rapidly across her tablet. She had always paid attention to human statements in council sessions, even when others dismissed them as idealistic nonsense. Ambassador Hayes had been warning them about something for months, perhaps years. But what? The first economic reports arrived before the session ended. The numbers were catastrophic. Human trade represented 34% of all galactic commerce. Their medical technology saved billions of lives annually across council space. Their food production supplemented agriculture on 47 worlds. Their manufacturing capabilities supplied critical components for everything from civilian infrastructure to military vessels. And now it was all gone. By the second day, the crisis had moved from theoretical to immediate. The Threnodai civilization sent an emergency broadcast to the Council. Their sun stabilization grid, maintained exclusively by human engineers, was beginning to fail. Without human expertise and replacement parts, they had approximately 6 months before their star entered an unstable phase that would render their homeworld uninhabitable. The Threnodidae were not alone. 12 council species reported critical supply shortages. Hospitals on 14 worlds faced medicine shortages within weeks. Defense fleets discovered that key components in their ship's systems were manufactured only by human corporations, with no existing contracts or blueprints shared with council members. Humanity had not just been participating in galactic civilization, they had become its backbone, and no one had noticed until that backbone was removed. Vexin worked through the night, searching for answers. She requisitioned every recording of council sessions from the past 5 years, every human diplomatic communication, every trade dispute and cultural exchange. Somewhere in this mountain of data was the reason humanity had walked away. She refused to believe they had done this capriciously. Humans were many things, but they were not capricious. Pattern emerged near dawn of the 3rd day. Ambassador Hayes had filed formal complaints about the Zilmar Empire 17 times in 2 years. Each complaint concerned the Zilmar slave trade, specifically their raids on frontier worlds in disputed territories. Each time the Council had dismissed the complaints. The Zilmar were a powerful member species, and slavery was considered a cultural practice protected under Council diversity laws. The humans had argued that sapient beings could not be property. The Council had argued that humanity could not impose its cultural values on other civilizations. The debates had been heated, with Ambassador Hayes speaking with unusual passion, but the votes had always gone against humanity. Vexin remembered those sessions now with growing horror. She had voted with the majority, believing that Council unity required respecting diverse cultural practices, even ones she personally found distasteful. But the 17th complaint had been different. Vexin pulled the recording and watched with mounting dread. Ambassador Hayes stood before the Council, her face pale and her hands trembling as she held a data tablet. The complaint was not about hypothetical frontier worlds this time. It was about New Providence, a human colony in the Beta Hydri system. 3 weeks ago, Hayes had said, her voice tight with controlled rage, Zilmar raiders attacked New Providence. They took 40,000 colonists. 12,000 of them were children. We have evidence that the Zilmar military provided support for this operation. We have evidence that Council intelligence knew about the planned raid and classified it as an internal matter outside Council jurisdiction because the Beta Hydri system falls in disputed space. Vexin felt her heart stop. She remembered this session. She remembered the vote. The Council had ruled that since Beta Hydri was in disputed territory, the raid did not violate Council law. The Zilmar had argued that the human colony was illegal under their territorial claims. The Council had sided with the Zilmar by a vote of 47 to 12. Ambassador Hayes had stood silent for a long moment after the vote was announced. Then she had gathered her materials, nodded once to the assembly, and left the chamber. It was the last time anyone had seen her. That session had been 14 days ago. Vexin initiated an emergency investigation, using her authority as a senior counselor to access classified intelligence archives. What she found made her physically ill. The Council's intelligence division had indeed known about the planned Zilmar raid on New Providence. They had classified it as a territorial dispute and decided not to warn the human colony. The raid had been devastating. 40,000 humans taken in the night sold the slave markets across Zilmar space and beyond. The humans had not asked for a military intervention. They had not demanded restitution. They had filed one final formal complaint, watched it be dismissed, and then quietly, systematically withdrawn every human being from Council space. They had not threatened war or economic sanctions. They had simply removed themselves from a civilization that had allowed their children to be sold into slavery. Vexin presented her findings to an emergency council session. The chamber fell into stunned silence as she played the recordings and displayed the evidence. When she finished, no one spoke for a full minute. "This is regrettable," Councilor Thrax finally said, "but it does not justify humanity's extreme response. The colony was in disputed territory. We cannot set a precedent of taking sides in such matters." 40,000 people, Vexin said softly. 12,000 children. Sold into slavery while we debated territorial law. Cultural practices differ, Zareth argued. We cannot impose human morality on the entire galaxy. Then we cannot expect humanity to remain part of a galaxy that tolerates the enslavement of their children, Vexin shot back. They have made their choice, now we must live with ours. The economic reports grew worse by the hour. Riots broke out on 6 worlds facing food shortages. The Threnodai star destabilization accelerated ahead of projections. Medical facilities across Council space began rationing life-saving treatments. 3 member species faced potential extinction-level events without human technological support. Desperate Council members attempted to breach the human communications blackout. Every message went unanswered. Diplomatic ships that approached the human defensive perimeter were turned back by automated weapons platforms that locked targeting systems on any vessel that crossed the boundary. The humans were not interested in negotiation. Vexin pushed for action. She assembled a coalition of counselors who recognized the magnitude of their mistake and demanded accountability. After 2 weeks of brutal political maneuvering, she forced a vote. The council formally condemned the Zilmar Empire's slave raids and demanded the immediate release of all human captives. The Zilmar response was swift and cowardly. Their entire government fled their homeworld aboard civilian transports, scattering into the galactic rim with whatever wealth and resources they could carry. Dead. They left behind a crumbling empire and 40,000 human prisoners scattered across 1,000 slave markets and territories they no longer controlled. Vexin personally led the rescue operations. She commandeered military vessels and diplomatic resources, traveling to every world where human captives had been sold. What she found in those places would haunt her for the rest of her life. The slavers had not been gentle with their human merchandise. Many of the captives bore scars, physical and psychological, that would never fully heal. And not all of them had survived. Of the 40,000 taken from New Providence, only 34,000 were still alive when rescue teams found them. Tied in captivity over 3 months. 6,000 people who would still be alive if the council had acted differently. If Vexin had voted differently. If anyone had listened when Ambassador Hayes had warned them again and again that this would happen. The rescue operations took 6 weeks. Every survivor was given medical care and psychological support, but Vexin could see in their eyes that something had broken. These people had been abandoned by a galactic civilization that claimed to value peace and cooperation. They had learned that their lives meant less than political convenience and cultural relativism. When the final transport carrying rescued humans departed Council space, Vexin sent a message to Earth. She detailed everything the Council had done to find and free the captives. She included a formal apology signed by 2/3 of the Council membership. She outlined proposed reforms to prevent such atrocities in the future. She did not ask for forgiveness or for humanity to return. She simply wanted them to know that some members of the Council understood the depth of their failure. For 2 weeks, there was no response. Then, on the 89th day since humanity's withdrawal, a message arrived at Council headquarters. It was brief and unsigned, written in plain diplomatic language without emotion or embellishment. It contained coordinates in neutral space and a time. It stated that rescued colonists should be delivered to those coordinates. It included a list of policy changes the Council would need to implement before humanity would consider resuming any form of contact. The list was extensive and non-negotiable. Vexin volunteered to lead the transport convoy. 37 ships carried the survivors of New Providence toward the rendezvous point. As they approached the coordinates, Vexin's sensors detected the human fleet waiting for them. 200 warships, arrayed in perfect formation, their weapons cold but their shields at full power. They were not taking any chances. The human vessels made no attempt to communicate. They simply waited, silent and watchful as the Council transports approached. Vexin ordered her ships to hold position at the designated coordinates and transmitted a simple message stating that the rescued colonists were ready for transfer. The human response was immediate and efficient. Medical ships emerged from the fleet formation and docked with the Council transports. Human personnel moved through the ships with practiced precision, documenting each survivor's condition and providing immediate care. They worked in complete silence, asking no questions of the Council crews, offering no thanks or acknowledgement. They simply collected their people and returned to their ships. Vexin watched the operation from her command deck. She wanted to speak with the human officers, to apologize personally. to explain that not all council members had supported the decisions that led to this catastrophe. But she understood that words were useless now. The humans had spent 2 years using words, and the council had not listened. Humanity had learned that their voices did not matter in council chambers, so they had used a different kind of communication. They had withdrawn, and in their absence they had taught the galaxy a lesson that no amount of debate could have conveyed. They had shown the Council exactly how dependent civilized space had become on human cooperation, human technology, and human participation. They had demonstrated the true cost of dismissing human concerns as emotional overreaction. The final transport completed its passenger transfer. The human medical ships detached and returned to the fleet formation. For a long moment, nothing happened. Vexin held her breath, wondering if there would be any acknowledgement at all. Then a single transmission came through, audio only, from one of the human warships. The voice was female, controlled, and utterly cold. The Council will implement every reform on the list we provided. There will be no negotiation, no compromise, and no timeline extensions. Until those reforms are complete and verified by independent monitors, humanity will maintain zero contact with Council space. Any violation of our borders will be considered an act of war. Any attempt to coerce or threaten humanity will result in permanent severance of all future relations. We will not warn you again. We will not argue or debate. We will simply act. Do you understand? Yes, Vexin replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We understand. Good. There was a pause, and when the voice spoke again, it carried the weight of profound loss. What? 6,000 of our people died because your council chose political convenience over moral courage. They died alone and afraid, far from home, while you debated cultural sensitivity and territorial law. Ambassador Hayes warned you 17 times. She begged you to act. You ignored her because you did not think humans would do anything about it. You were wrong. The transmission ended. The human fleet began to move, their formation shifting as they prepared to return to Earth's territory. Vexin watched them go, her hearts heavy with shame and grief. She had voted with the majority. She had believed that maintaining council unity was more important than addressing human concerns. She had been so terribly, catastrophically wrong. As the last human ship vanished from her sensors, Vexin recorded a personal log entry. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Today I learned that silence can be louder than any declaration of war. The humans did not threaten us. They did not attack us. They did not even argue with us. They simply looked at what we had become, at the civilization we claimed to represent, and they decided we were not worth their time or effort. They walked away, and in walking away, they showed us who we truly are. We are a council that allows children to be enslaved for the sake of political convenience. We are a civilization that values cultural relativism more than fundamental morality. We are a society that ignores warnings until catastrophe forces us to pay attention. The humans tried to change us with words. When that failed, they changed us with absence. I pray we are capable of learning the lesson they have taught us. I pray we can become worthy of their return. But I fear that some bridges, once burned, leave scars too deep to heal. The humans will remember what we allowed to happen to their children. They will remember that we chose diplomatic convenience over their lives. And they will never, ever forget that we did not listen until it was too late. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from those who refuse to value you. The humans understood this. Now, finally, so do we. The council convoy turned and began the long journey back to council space. Behind them, the stars held their secrets, and somewhere in the darkness, humanity watched and waited. The galaxy had learned what it meant to lose Earth's partnership, Earth's technology, and Earth's trust. Whether they could ever earn any of it back remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The Galactic Council would never again dismiss a human warning. They would never again vote to ignore human concerns. They would never again assume that humanity would accept injustice simply because it was politically convenient. The humans had withdrawn without a word, and in that silence they had spoken louder than 1,000 speeches ever could. The empty chair in the council chamber remained vacant. It would stay that way for a long time, a reminder of the cost of moral cowardice and the price of ignoring those who speak uncomfortable truths. And every counselor who passed that chair would remember the day humanity left and the terrible lesson they had learned too late. Some mistakes cannot be undone. Some wounds cannot be healed. Some absences speak louder than any presence ever could. Humanity had taught the galaxy this truth, not with weapons or threats, but with the simple act of withdrawing their participation from a civilization that had proven itself unworthy of it. The Council would implement the reforms. They would abolish the cultural protections that had allowed slavery to flourish. They would create enforcement mechanisms to prevent such atrocities in the future. They would do everything humanity demanded and more, desperately hoping to prove that they had changed. But deep down, Vexin knew the truth. Humanity might eventually return to the Council chambers. They might resume trade and diplomatic relations. They might even forgive given enough time and evidence of genuine change. But they would never forget. They would never again trust the Council the way they once had. They would never again believe that words and warnings would be enough to inspire action. The humans had learned to speak a different language now. The language of consequences. The language of withdrawal. The language of letting others face the results of their own choices. It was a harsh language, unforgiving and cold. But it was the only language the Council had proven capable of understanding, and so humanity had used it with devastating effectiveness. Vexin looked at the stars through her viewport and wondered what Ambassador Victoria Hayes was doing now. Was she with the fleet, watching the Council convoy depart? Was she on Earth, helping the rescued colonists rebuild their shattered lives? Was she in some government office, drafting the policies that would govern humanity's future relations with galactic civilization? Wherever she was, Vexin hoped she found some measure of peace. The ambassador had tried to prevent this tragedy. She had warned them, pleaded with them, argued with them. And when all her words failed, she had done the only thing left to do. She had gathered her people and walked away. It was the right choice. The only choice, and it was a choice the Council would spend decades trying to overcome. Some lessons could only be learned through loss. Some truths could only be understood through absence. The humans had tried teaching with words. When that failed, they taught with silence. The galaxy would never be the same.